And we're live. Welcome to you, the viewer. Welcome to our fantastic panel. It's the After Dram, and that means it is time to unwind. So put your feet up, grab a dram, cocktail, dram or two. I've got a dram and water because it's early for us. But if it was later, I'd have 2 drams. You know me. And relax. As a quick recap to our early afternoon, Dave, Kent, Nick, Val, and I, and Val will be on the screen in a second, I think, did a deep dive into the second quarter of this book right here, Whisky Island, a portrait of Isla and its whiskeys. Love the book. If you don't have it, buy it. Don't just watch, buy the book. You'll find out so much more if you do. And again, it was pre-released in 2004 as Peat, Smoke, and Spirit. If you want to get that copy, you won't have the introduction by Broom, which is lovely to have because I like Broom. So it was fun. Andrew was fun. It was educational. We're working him hard. We gave him homework to do between the sections, the 10 minutes. But what we should do right now is have another introduction and a bit of what's in your glasses now. And we're going to do the same thing. We'll do Dave, Kent, Nick, and Val if she comes in, and then we'll finish off with Andrew, and then we'll start it all off. So you're up.
Hey guys, it's Yukon Dave coming from his basement. What's in my glass today, or this second one, is the Scarabus, and I bought this because it was somebody gave it the best of, and I don't know if it wasn't Ralphie, but I don't know who did. I don't know if you know that, Dolph.
I don't, but I have the exact same bottle sitting in front of me, so it's a good thing. You know what? We'll send that out to the panel. Someone on the side that does that, look up Scarabus and see what it was the best of. Best of something.
Yeah, that's the only reason I bought it.
Awesome. Hi, my name's Kent. I go by Whisky Ass on all platforms, and I've gone into an older bottle that I kind of forgot on the back of my shelf. So
nice.
She's nice,
and that's a beautiful dram. And we had that with our post-Festivus tasting when we did Isla 2 years ago, I think. And that went down very quickly. It was one of the favorites of the night. Nick, you're up.
Hey, everyone. It's Nick with Black Hat Whiskey. I am still working on my tea in my whiskey cup. And I do have a bottle of Bowmore on the side because eventually we will be talking about Bowmore today and the book. But thanks for joining.
Thank you. And Andrew, the man of the hour.
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to be with you. Speaking to you from Montpellier in the south of France, where it's night. You can see the darkness gathering around me. Perfect for drams. But I haven't got any Bowmore. I haven't got a huge amount of whiskey here, so what I'm having is Lefroy Four-Oak, which is what I happen to have here at the moment. But it's
and
good,
I'm
good dram.
It is a very good dram, and I am jealous of that one. And here's me, and I'm just going to show you. Same thing Dave's got, so the Scarabus. I like it. And Bowmore's part of this blend. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's part of the blend. I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, someone should tell me. That's good. And we're going to start with our initial quote here. And there it is. So we're quoting Andrew to start off, as we should. And now, over to you. I urge you to arm yourself with a bottle of Isla malt. In question, pour yourself a glass and only then begin reading. Well, we've been reading for a while, but we've been drinking this for quite a while too. So we do have the malt. I'm really happy about it. And one thing I do want to, because let's get the panel involved right away. What's the prevalent notes for Bowmore? Is there something, because I can tell it's Bowmore because of a note that a friend told me to look for. And how about you guys? Can you tell if it's Bowmore off the cuff?
I can't because it's my first Bowmore, but I do enjoy it. It's got the mouthfeel, the maltiness, mouthfeel that I like, and it's got a really long finish, which I enjoy. And the peat's kind of subtle.
And Andrew talks about that too, being the only mid-range peat on Isla. And he asked, why don't more people do it? And I'm wondering the same thing. Anyway, Nick, how about you? Any prevalent notes?
For me, I find there's this beautiful salty note to Bowmore, and it's that salty savory that it keeps bringing you back. It's like eating peanuts or eating just Ripple chips. It keeps enticing you, and there's this floral note with some of the older Bowmores and some of their specialty line. There's this candied sweet floral note that I get sucked into, and it's a happy spot.
Excellent. And it's one of the floral notes that I remember. And I'm going to click on Val just to open her up. Welcome back, Val.
Thank you.
But we're going to, and just so you know where we are, we're talking about Bowmore. And if you have a specific note that makes you think of Bowmore. So we're going to go to Kent now. What do you think, buddy?
It's the between the heathered peat and that oily sweetness that always gets me.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And Val, you're on the spot because you just came in. But can you recognize a Bowmore by any prevalent flavor or notes?
For me, believe it or not, I get a brininess from Bowmore. Yeah. So I didn't hear what you guys said, so that's totally off the cuff. But what's funny about that is and I'm going to set the stage here. I was in Vegas in a cigar lounge because I also do premium cigars, as some of you may know. And a cigar producer asked me to recommend a scotch for his cigar, which is always a nightmare because pairing is my least favorite thing to do. It's a crapshoot. I don't care. You've got to have so many notes to do a pairing successfully, but whatever. So, and not only that, you got to look at what's on the menu where, in the lounge where you're having your cigar, and they might not have what you think would be the best pair, even if you're the smartest person in the world. So here I'm looking at the menu, and I'm thinking, fuck it. Can I say that? Or are we in public?
You can say this is the After Dram. Fuck it all.
It's After Dram, and you were 21 plus.
I'm thinking, screw this. I'm not going to play games with this guy. I'm going to play the easy route. Easy but educated, and I went with the Bowmore Darkest, right? The 15, because you can't go wrong with that dram. I don't care who you are, no matter what you're trying to do, it's probably going to work. And so he tasted and he loved it with his cigar. And as he was drinking the dram and smoking a cigar, I looked over at him and I said, well, the only question I have for you is, how did you get the banana in your cigar, the banana aroma? And he's like, there's no banana in my cigar. Have it your way, dude, but there's banana in your cigar. And about 10 minutes later, he said, I just got the banana. Now, maybe I am so powerful that I know, right? I can just influence him. But no, there seriously was banana in that cigar. So now what's happened to me is when I think of the Bowmore 15, I think banana, even though it's not there.
Okay. And it is there because you thought of it. And I do that. When we go to tastings, I kind of play around sometimes. The people on the panel, Nick and Kent and Dave, we go to tastings often, not for a year now, but they're usually 3, 4, 5, 6 a month. I'd go to tastings, and I'd throw out something, marshmallow, and then just say that and see, I taste marshmallow.
Marshmallow's pretty safe though. It's either going to be marshmallow or toasted marshmallow, and nobody's going to argue with toasted marshmallow.
But if you do it with peat and it comes out, that's the thing. So you throw out things, jelly beans, I'll say sometimes too. It's the same thing, right? And your plain almonds can get everything too good, but marzipan, everyone talks about marzipan.
Marzipan's the big one.
Where was I? I don't even know. You said fuck it and you threw me off.
You're so off. You know what? Let's go to the really interesting question that started before we started the After Dram. Talbot.
Do it.
Oh wow, yeah, no kidding. I love Violet, my kind of girl.
So we've had all these landowners. They've been good, some been bad, some have gone bankrupt. And then all of a sudden we get the Talbots.
Yeah. It's
lovely individual.
It's an absolutely amazing story. And in fact, when I wrote the book, the editor I was working with, she said, do we really need all this Talbot stuff? And I said, wait a minute, it's just such a fantastic story. You can't possibly leave it out. And I won her over in the end. And then at the end, when we kind of signed off on the project, she said, well, I know what your next book's going to be about. You have to write up the Talbot story as a separate story. Well, I've never done that. I don't, have time to go and do the research it would require. But I have often thought it would be just a great movie. This guy is a movie waiting to happen.
Yep.
We
fantastic.
should do the screenplay.
Yeah,
there you go.
If I had some R&R time, maybe I'd have a go. But yeah, I mean, he was, you know, the most extraordinary person who's ever been involved with Isla in many ways, I think. Fantastically wealthy, obviously had psychological problems of various sorts.
Or not, right?
Or-
He didn't hurt anybody. He didn't blow up World Trade Centers. How bad could he be?
He might have been very meticulous in what he did. Very,
you know, I often think about how badly those children were treated. You know, the children they produced, they didn't really seem to care about at all. They just wanted to go gallivanting off around the world in his wife, who was
that's
as
what they were
extraordinary
used to.
as he was.
Tell us a bit of the background story, Andrew. Just a little bit, not too much, because people have to buy the book, but just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, he was a sort of an upper class Englishman. He'd been to Eton, and you know, fantastic family wealth from Lancashire. But he sort of seemed to hate his parents and hate his family and hate the place he came from and hated living there, and it had bad memories for him. So he became a sort of inveterate traveler. But you know, he wasn't sort of traveling the easy way. He was traveling to extraordinary places the most difficult way he possibly could. He was a great hunter as well.
Yeah, I did.
So he was going to extraordinary, fierce, difficult places and shooting things when he got there. Some of it's quite dated now. I mean, his sort of attitude towards the natural world strikes us rather strangely now. And he then married this equally extraordinary woman who'd been brought up all over the world and called Violet, in Peru and in Belgium and in various other places. And they kind of made this sort of fantastic couple and did all this traveling together, produced these children. They went to various places. He lived on a yacht for a while, and they got involved in the war effort and drove ambulances and threw their money at this and threw their money at that. And then they eventually bought an estate in Ireland. And Violet said, "Oh, you know, the price was ridiculous. It cost us nothing, you know." And they went off there, but then they fell foul of the Republicans. They got on the wrong side of the Republicans and had to leave Ireland in quite a hurry. And fetched up.
He shot him, didn't he?
Well, they stole his best car. He didn't like that.
Okay.
You know, there was a stuff going on, and then the word went out that, you know, somebody was coming for the Squire of Lytham, and then they thought they better move somewhere else. So they fetched up on Isla as being a sort of suitably safe place. I doubt it was that, in fact, but I don't think he was very high up on the Republican hit list. No. You know, they bought Kilbolton Estate and turned it into this sort of extraordinary sporting estate with the traditions of shooting and gralloching. But you know, it's particularly memorable because Violet wrote this extraordinary book all about her husband and their life together. Clifton himself, Talbot Clifton, you know, didn't want to write anything at all. He just lived it. That was all that he ever did. He never wrote a word about it, and almost sort of seemed to dismiss it. But she thought it was all very extraordinary, as it indeed it was, and wrote it all up in a very eccentric and memorable book. Was quite widely regarded at the time, you know, in the interwar years, as being a sort of classic of travel literature.
You said it was on the New York Times best-selling list.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I can't wait to get a copy.
Yeah. Okay. It's quite hard to find. I got my copy through Abe Books, so they are around and out there. But it's well worth a read, and you know, I kind of pick out some of the most extraordinary stuff and retail it in the book. And in particular, this extraordinary Christmas feast they had somewhere in Arctic Russia, where it's sort of
1,000 years old.
It began with Talbot Clifton had just shot a bear, so they began with the sort of jellied bear paws, and then moved on to other bits of bear, and then the main course was defrosted mammoth, because they were having this Christmas lunch with a sort of an archaeologist who was working on mammoth remains. He just found this extraordinary mammoth, so they thought they'd eat some of the mammoth. Then they went on to Siberian capercaillie and ended up with a Christmas pudding knocked together by Talbot himself. And you know, I think it's one of the great all-time gastronomic extraordinary meals.
It reminded me of a movie. Can anyone think of the movie I'm thinking of right now where they had something so it started with monkey brains.
Indiana Jones.
Thank you very much. Nick, you and I were compatible.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Yes. Yep. And
that's my childhood. Sorry.
Okay. And we can go back to the mammoth too. But sorry, I've got lots of questions. I'll let you go, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the rest is in the book if you want to have a read. But it really is a great story within a story. Fantastic. Yeah.
I love that chapter of the book, or that section of the book.
Yeah.
It just, and I mean, I thought it was absolutely, basically very genteel of you to follow up with that heart-breaking letter of the warrior. Basically, what else can we call him? The warrior hero to his parents. That he's prepared to die, but he can die with a clean heart, with a clear conscience. And oh my God, I get weepy.
Well, not just his clean conscience, but his parents. It's like, don't mourn for me. It is. And buy the book to get that just one section. Or Andrew, you said it was also on a plaque. Where? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Well, it's in the Museum of Isle of Life, and it's such a popular and often requested exhibit that they have. Well, they did when I researched the book, but you can take it away on a sheet. So
nice.
Okay.
And I have a question directly for Val, who doesn't like pairing, and for Nick, who loves pairing. What are you pairing with mammoth?
I was thinking that. I'm like, what do you pair with mammoth? It's been sitting there. Is this like aged? Well, is it aged though? Consider it like aged steak.
It's aged regardless. It's very old. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case you can think of it. And we might as well just say the darkest, because I think that goes with anything. And if anyone finds the darkest out there, you got to buy it. You really do for Bowmore. It's my favorite, and I haven't seen it for quite a long time. So darkest for Val. Can I say that for you, Val?
Absolutely.
Good.
And I mean, it's not that I dislike pairings. I just think they're very difficult because it's a moving target quite often.
But our Nick does very, very well. And you haven't heard this or maybe you have seen it on Instagram. She does cereal pairings with whiskey. And we have one of those tastings coming up. I think it's next week, isn't it?
2 weeks away.
2 weeks away. So Nick does very well. So we have to give her kudos for that. And I'm taking over the questioning again. Viewers, if you're reading the book with us now, or if you've already read it, or you haven't read it, I encourage you to take a good look at the distillery's fact files. Sorry. There's so much information there that I thought they would hold close to the chest. So panel, we've only had 2 so far. So Ardbeg and Bowmore, and there's many more to come. But if you look at the information, it is very, very specific as to what they do. And I'm wondering if there's anything from my panel that's particularly surprising that you saw in there. Either that they're want to divulge or something interesting that they actually do. So I'm going to throw that out there as I drink some of my Scarabus.
Well, the thing that came of interest to me was the color of the water first, which I've never had anybody tell people, our waters are brown.
Yeah, and it lists the color of he lists the color of the water. It's funny.
But one of the things I found really interesting was the malt type, because we use a variety of different malts in our process. Almost everybody uses Optic. And I've always known that the Scottish have kind of a short range of malt options. And this is just confirming that. And I found that really interesting that you actually put it in there.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. That's 2 from you. Kent, do you have anything?
You know what? I was really the water. Brown water is like, again, going back to our statement about our water in Alberta being very clean and stuff. Yeah. For the most part, except for, spring runoff, which, we have to add lots of chemicals to. Yeah. Anyways, but brown water. Yeah. I mean, if that was poured in my bathtub, I'd be like, no, I'm good.
Just like Andrew's brother. It's like, nope. I'm not bathing in that. What are you talking about? I'm cleaner than the water.
But it goes back to an old statement that I think from my grandparents as well, right? It's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And you're like, what does it even mean? But, you know, dad got his bath, right? Once a week, they had the bath. So dad got the bath, mom got the bath, the oldest, middle, youngest, baby. By the time you get to the baby, the water is, you can't see.
I wouldn't bathe a child in that. I'm sorry. No.
Right?
Save that child.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Nick, how about something surprising to you in the fact files?
It was actually a reference that Andrew made to another book. And I had to go digging in my bookshelf, but I pulled it out. The Whiskey Distillers of the United Kingdom by Alfred Bernard. And just reading that section and his whole description of Bowmore and seeing that picture that he has in the book of the different stills set up. It was so fascinating, just that level of detail and that curiosity when he wrote this book, and then our own curiosity now and how it continues.
Nick, before I go to Val and ask her, can you bring up the picture of the 4 stills that Andrew had in his book and he referred to in that book? If we have that. And this is a question for a second. If you can see the one that on the second from the left, it's got 2 line arms. And I've seen that before. And my question to the panel was, where did I see that? So I'm going to come back to that in a second. But we've seen a still or stills in our 10 book travels that we've done over the years or this year that had 2, and I think they were both going up. I don't think it was one down, one up, or just straight, but there was something there. But Val, I'll go to you. I know you just came on. The question was, is there something from the distillery fact files that you found particularly surprising that they actually told them, or it's something that was surprising in itself?
What struck me the most, and maybe this is because I'm just accustomed to it, was pronunciation. I mean, let's face it, as North Americans, we don't always pronounce Scottish names the way that the Scots would expect us to pronounce them.
Yeah.
But I hear everybody saying Bowmore when in fact it's Bowmore. The emphasis is on the more.
The second
syllable.
Yep.
Yeah. And I, to me, that's fascinating. And it's so minute that sometimes I think, oh my God, quit being so petty. Right. But I'm slightly autistic, and for me, it's got to be exactly that. And I've been told that I'm on the spectrum. And so I use that as my excuse every chance I get.
I might be on that spectrum too for ADD anyways, and we accept it as someone over 30 that might not have been tested specifically for something. We'll just say we're on there, we're okay. That's part of what we are. You have to love it, right?
I know.
But I'm going to suggest a book from
Yukon Dave has a
author.
I think Yukon Dave has a question.
Before he says it.
I got an observation.
Before he says it.
What?
Sorry.
Okay.
One sec. Val, read the book called The Language of Whiskey by David McNichol, and it's all pronunciation and where the names come from and the background to it. So he was an author previous to us, which was fantastic. So sorry, Dave, you're up, buddy.
So I had lots of things that I found really interesting, and the one that I never heard this before, but you talked about the size of the still and how much liquid they put in the still. So how much it's been charged.
Yes.
And I just found that so interesting. And when you talked about the guys that owned Ardbeg a while back, they would fill that thing full, and the other guys would fill it at like 66% or something like that. And it just numbers and stuff started whirling around in my head. It was something I've never heard of before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, these whole fact files, they were kind of almost the trickiest bit of the book to get together. Not that I think anybody wanted to conceal anything. It's just I became a real pest at that point to try and get all this information out of them, and had to keep pestering and pestering and pestering.
Yeah.
But I thought it was worth doing because actually you'll only really understand the character of the spirit by looking at that kind of level of detail, really. And it is very interesting to compare the practices and see how things differ. You know, I had never realized until I wrote the book, Dave has just mentioned about, you know, the level to which you charge the still, and that is obviously a significant factor. How wide you make the cuts or how narrow you make the cuts. We all knew about still shapes, and that is interesting, but you know, how high what strength you ferment the beer to, how quickly you run the stills or how slowly you run the stills. All of these are very often have an economic dimension to them. So the more industrialized owners will try and do it the most efficiently. But then along came people like Bruichladdich, for example, at the time I wrote the book, under independent ownership, and they knew that everything they were going to sell was going to be under their own name. They weren't selling into the fillings market in the same way that the Diageo distilleries were, for example. So they then had a quality approach to doing everything, and they did everything rather differently. And so discovering all of that was very, very interesting, beginning to trace the sources of distillery character, the technical sources of distillery character in the distilling process. And I'm sure that there is much that I didn't uncover. There's still much more to be said. There's an even geekier book to be written out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Where you actually, you could write a colossal book about distilling practices and their significance in terms of the way that they influence spirit. I'm not going to write it, but
Andrew, that would be
there's anybody out
you're
there looking for a subject, that would also be a very interesting subject, I think, on the technical side of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. And Nick, you've got the science and sorry?
Science and
Thanks,
comedy.
Nick.
Yeah.
Who's that by, Nick? Sorry. Throw that up.
This is by Ian Baxton and Paul Hughes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I just didn't recognize the pink, but I'm just realizing now that pink is your notes and not the book itself. Good. You know what? And Dave, I'm going to agree with you because I never thought of it in those terms. And you think of the line arm, and you think of maybe the worm tub or what they do to condense. There's so many factors, and we hear about it more now when people are trying to disprove the terroir theory, and we hear about all the different ways that they can manipulate the spirit. I never ever considered how high or how much or what the volume is they filled that the spirit still to. I didn't ever think that, and Andrew, you're the first person to put that in a book, and I've read a lot. First person I've seen that with, so I really appreciated that. But I really thought that they would have held this information close to the chest. I couldn't even imagine how much prodding you would have to do to get this information. And in my mind, I think I would have been one distillery, gotten the information from the one distillery, and then proven to everyone else that I got this information, and you have to give me the same thing. Otherwise, that's the only way I could picture you getting all this information. Or they just loved you so much and you had that personality, they just want to give it to you. I thought that was pretty cool.
Well, I think, that there was a big change of heart in sort of distillery culture between the old days, let's say the 1990s and earlier, where all of this information was regarded as being part of the secret of the distillery, and you couldn't possibly let it out. And then, there was a gradual understanding that the more you told people, the more interested they became. So, nobody can reproduce any distillery anywhere else. It just can't be done. So why not give this information out? Nobody's ever, it's not, you're not going to lose or risk anything. And so that's then it was much easier to get that information. After that, so from the turn of the century, I think most things were available. If you asked nicely, you could get the information.
And it's great information. Sorry,
I'm kind of curious. Did any like you're the drinks dude, right? And did anybody in your family lead you to this, or are you kind of an outlier in your family?
Outlier, outlaw. I mean,
Black
dad
sheep.
was a priest. He's dead now. So I grew up
Really?
in a vicarage. Yeah, sure.
Your dad was a priest?
Yeah, an Anglican priest. Yeah.
You
yeah.
know what? I come from a family of priests. I really do.
Okay.
You know, I have two cousins who are priests, and I have three cousins who are monks. So the way I see it, I'm going to heaven by default.
The
On
cigar
family connections alone.
Scotch drinking Val doesn't care. Caution
Yeah.
to the wind. I'm getting in no matter what. It's like
Hey,
having
wait a minute,
mother.
dude. We're Ukrainian. We drink for life.
Okay. I'm all for that. That's fantastic.
The After Dram going to hell.
This is right where the After Dram's supposed to be.
Oh, Andrew, okay. Your dad was a priest,
Yeah.
and
But he loved drinking. He was a merry.
fair
priest.
enough.
Yeah. So, and actually what happened was I got to about 16. You know, we didn't have much money. So I had two younger brothers. So there were four males and my long suffering mum. And I worked out that we really didn't have enough to drink. So I just started making homemade wine at that point.
Nice.
And got very interested in fermentation and grape juice concentrate and lactic acid and malic acid and all that sort of stuff.
Sorry,
And
Andrew,
that was
how old were you again? 6 years old?
16 when I was.
Six.
Yeah.
That's about right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it went from there really. So, and then it funneled outwards in all directions. And then what I loved, of course, was what I referred to earlier, this ability of alcoholic beverages to soak up culture more generally.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that immensely enjoyable. When later on I had a chance to work as the drinks writer for the London Evening Standard newspaper, and that gave me the chance to discover beer and spirits as well as wine. Because I began with wine alone. First went to Ireland. I thought this is the most exciting, romantic place I've ever been. I just want to have an excuse to keep coming back here, which is really why I wrote the book. It was a great excuse to keep going back to Ireland and being nosy when I got there.
And your rewrite that's going to happen right away, and why they'll pay for you to go back there right away. I think that's fantastic, John.
Well, it's not only that, Dolph, but think about the tax write-offs, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes, I agree.
if we really think about it, Andrew Jefford, again, I go back to he's a god because he really is our guiding light. If we just listen to how he lived, we can learn so much about how to explore and be diverse in our drinks appreciation. And I mean, okay, Dolph, you showed an opaque tasting glass, right?
Yep.
No, not that one. Not a Glencairn.
Your black one.
The black one. Right? Right? Okay. So okay. I would have a hard time holding that because I need a stem. Yeah, I need some kind of a stem. But I remember when I got my Provence credentials as an accredited educator, we were all very cocky, all of us, when we walked into the room because we were so sure we knew all about Provence, blah, 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 right? And when we walked into the room, yes, they had the ISO standard tasting glasses, but they were all in black. And we were so screwed because we couldn't see the color. And when I'm talking color, I mean color. We're talking color. When it comes to Provence, you got to be able to see the color. And so there we were, and we were shocked. But this was a very good learning experience for us because whether it's wines or whiskeys, you have to be able to go beyond the visual and experience the aroma and the place that it takes you to. This is why I have such a problem with terroir, because terroir is a French term, and outside of France, I'm not sure terroir has the same meaning, because I think it sometimes only means dirt. And I could be wrong, but I think it only means dirt, which is still fair, but it's not like French terroir, where they've got aspect and they've got hills and they've got drainage and all this other stuff. But what that experience in Provence taught me at the Provence Institute of like wine understanding, for the lack of a better term, was sometimes you're going to be faced with a situation that you cannot get past. You're going to have to rely on your own capabilities to pass. And luckily I passed.
Okay.
But it wasn't the easiest thing to do. And not only that, you've got to be able to rise above your own fears and say, I get this. I'm good at this. I get this.
Yep.
And Nick, when you do your pairings, I mean, kudos to you, because I'm terrified of pairings. Because for me, they're a moving target, because I don't have any biases. To me, every wine goes with every food because I separate them. I'm not saying that every wine pairs great with every food. Of course it doesn't. You can ruin the food, you can ruin the wine. But you know what? I'm craving one kind of wine, let's say a Merlot, and this actually happened. I'm craving a Merlot, but I'm also craving a Caesar salad. Like that's a nightmare. But
Not going to work.
You just
Oh, it
throw
is.
it all together and you shouldn't care.
Yeah.
But Val, you're segueing into our next question. Perfect. So, Andrew talks about the 3 1964 drams that he has at Bowmore, which made me infinitely jealous. I really was. But I'm not sure why, but this made me also question whether we taste or analyze spirits differently. Now, you're talking about wine, and Val, you could even think of this in terms of cigars. But I'm wondering, do we taste beer, wine, spirits, cigars differently? Do we look, when we're in one frame of mind, look for a specific taste profile, or do we let it, whatever our experiences, our past experiences that we have, let it bring us there, or do we really limit ourselves? So when I try beer, I know I try it differently. I look for different flavors, but I'm wondering if other people open themselves up to every taste profile they've ever had when they're doing whiskey, as opposed to beer, as opposed to wine, as opposed to anything else, cigars. So,
okay, I'm going to say right now, right here, right now, the three
she was frozen.
common denominators: length, balance, complexity.
Mhm.
What? If you've got those covered, you're golden.
For any taste profile, let's say
Anything.
food. Val. Let's
I
talk
don't
about
care
food.
what
Does
it
work
is.
for food.
It doesn't matter what it is.
Okay.
If the aromas and the tastes don't stay with you, it doesn't have length.
But do you look for a certain flavor and taste within something?
That's different.
That's my question.
That's different to me. I know, Andrew, you're the genius. You tell us.
He's our
Well-
spirit guide, our spiritual guide. That Val.
He's my spirit animal. Andrew Jefford is my spirit animal.
I go back to what I said earlier about, you know, the cultural significance of all of these things. And, you know, when we taste, yes, you're absolutely right, Val. There is a kind of objective basis for tasting everything. We have our tasting apparatus. We always use it. And we're using it in exactly the same way for anything we drink. But we have different expectations when we come to different drinks. And this is particularly noticeable when you look at the issue, for example, of wine faults. What is a wine fault? Okay.
Band-Aid.
So one of the classic wine faults is Brettanomyces spoilage, Brett.
Right, Brett.
Nobody likes Brett in wine. And yet if you're a
some
microbrewer,
people like Brett in wine.
well, okay, some people like Brett
They
in wine.
say they
but
do.
Trained palates are trained to kind of swipe those wines off
Right.
the table if they have them.
Right.
And yet, if you're a microbrewer and you want to make a Gers or a Lambic style of beer,
You're okay with that.
what is the one yeast that's essential for that? Brettanomyces, because those are originally they're spontaneously fermented beers made in the Brussels area. You open the window, you let wild yeast in, and those beers are always characterized by Brettanomyces yeast aromas and flavors, to the extent that when microbrewers want to make that beer style around the world, they have to send off a special Brettanomyces yeast in order to make it. The same thing when you come to classic Burton IPA, India Pale Ale styles, you know, characterized in Burton by the famous Burton Snatch, this sulphury note which you're getting from water filtered through the gypsum beds underneath Burton upon Trent. That's a terroir factor if ever there was one. But if you get those sulphury notes in a wine, they're a fault. If you get what's called dimethyl sulfide in a wine, very common in certain Chardonnays, that tin sweet corn aroma, that's always a fault in wine. Fault in Chardonnay, will swipe it off the table in any Australian wine show. And yet, when I once went to visit the brewers of Carling Black Label in the UK, very popular lager in the UK, the one thing that it has to have for the Carling Black Label drinker to enjoy and like it is DMS, dimethyl sulfide. If it's not there, the drinkers don't like it. So that's 3 examples of things that are faults in one drink that are absolutely essential in other drinks. So this whole cultural context is very important the whole time when we drink. The question of acidity in wine, for example, is incredibly important. And, many wine geeks are super critical of any wine that's deficient in acidity in any way at all. They like to have fairly prominent levels of acidity. Whiskey has 0 acidity. There's no acidity in whiskey profiles at all. In most beers, there's 0 acidity as well. Obviously, lambic and Gers are different. Wheat beer is different. But if you're drinking a classic IPA, Burton Pale Ale, there's no acidity there at all. There shouldn't be. So, is acidity good or bad in an alcoholic beverage? It all depends what you're drinking, because these things are always culturally defined. So I go back to this thing I'm trying to emphasize the whole time, that the cultural context is very, very important too. Val, you wanted to say something?
Here's one for you 2 wine geeks.
Hey, I had my hand up.
Well, this is directed at you. Why most red wines give me heartburn instantly?
Okay, let's come back to that. Okay. Park that, because I want to talk about acidity.
Put a pin in it. It's nicer.
And acidity, W set L3, so like superhuman. No, that's a lie. I know. But anyway, acidity is the backbone of wine, and you need acidity for aging. You don't need it to age beer. You don't need it to age whiskey, but you do need acidity. I could be wrong, but this is what I'm hoping I'm right on. You do need acidity for wine to rest and age. Mm-hmm. And what I love about acidity, and I think this should be remembered no matter what you're drinking, is acidity can be measured. And Lisa Airy, with whom you're familiar, Andrew, Lisa Airy taught me, and I appreciate this lesson, that when you swallow a beverage, all right, you count the number of swallows after you've swallowed the initial gulp. Mm-hmm. And if you can get to 5 swallows, that's good acidity. And
while still having the flavor profile as you're swallowing the 5.
There we go. Yeah. No, and even what it generates in terms of the saliva in your mouth. You want that. So absolutely. I'm not disputing and I don't drink beer. I mean, honest to God, 2 sips of beer and I'm a fucking degenerate. Lampshade on the head. I'm not good at beer, so I'm not somebody who can discuss that.
Kick her out, doll.
What do you do? Dave from Yukon Brewing will send you some beers and
invite her to more parties.
Like what's going to happen? This all experimental, Val. We're all happy and we all know each other. We're all good.
Hey, I can drink a bottle of tequila and be fine. I cannot drink beer. It affects me.
Depends on your definition of fine, really. I'll find something. But we're getting back to my question. Are we tasting things differently with the different spirits? And Andrew is saying yes. And Val, you're saying...
I'm saying your tasting apparatus is the same, but when you come to each drink, you come with a set of expectations. Yes. So you go into that drink looking for different things.
Fair enough. Yeah, you've got that's called bias, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, or cultural awareness. Bias sounds,
like your bias.
Is it
Dave? Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah. So when it goes back to me being a beer guy, and I've got this comfort level with beer because I've got a set of style guidelines. And is it a IPA? Is it a it doesn't matter what it is. I've got all these guidelines. So I sit down before I judge beer with the guidelines. I look at them, I read them, and I judge them accordingly. When I'm doing whiskey, there are no guidelines. Everything's brand new to me, or everything has been brand new to me.
Oh, there's guidelines. You just haven't researched them.
Well, they're not in a book.
Guidelines.
Somebody needs to give me a book I can put on my credenza with my. Here's my beer guidelines.
Yep.
I don't know if you can see all that.
Is
those
that
are
the
all
beer judge one, the BC?
Yeah.
Judging book. Yeah.
And it gives me a starting point. I need a reference. Like I need a scale. I need, like, I like that 100% gives you a guideline.
Yeah, but you know what, Dave? What you need to do is you need to get, and absolutely, you need a reference. You need a reference guide. I'm not disputing that, but you also need a partner in the discovery. Like when I went through my WSET L3, I would not be as confident as I am today if I didn't have the same people for the 3 levels of WSET, because I had constant. I was able to always reference what those other people were getting. And this is very rare in WSET. In WSET, Wine and Spirit Education Trust, it's very rare that you get the same groups of people in level 1, 2, and 3. And we were very fortunate that we had the same instructor, and the same attendees. So basically, I was able, and I did this, like I created my own spreadsheet, and I memorized people's voices so that when they got a note, I had a colored highlighter to note the note, like to mark on my spreadsheet all of the descriptors. If, Diane and Brad and Dave got all of those notes, I marked it in blue. But if Sarah and Nick got something different, I marked them in yellow because I wanted to see what the discrepancies were. I mean, come on. We all know that there's like 300 to 1,000 different descriptors that you can get in wine, whiskeys, or cigars. So that means they're all valid, which is just, it's such a difficult part of assessing any of these things because they can all be right. But what are the common ones? You want to break it down slowly but surely to the common ones. And that's what I did with my highlighters. I broke it down to the common ones. And I mean, when, whiskey is one thing, but when you're talking about wine, you can take a grape like Cabernet Sauvignon. The problem with wine versus whiskey is Scotch whiskey is all produced in a relatively cold climate. American whiskey is all produced in a relatively hot climate. When it comes to wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon can go from a hot climate to a cold climate, and the descriptors can be entirely different. Like in a hot climate Cabernet Sauvignon, you're going to get black olive. In a cold climate Cabernet Sauvignon, you're going to get black currant. They are very, very different. They're nothing alike. One is the fruit, and one is something you add to pizza.
Well, Dave, no matter how you want to actually go through this with beer, spirits, I'm there with you. I will be the one thing that's with you for years and years to come with any spirits so that I can give you that grounding. I'll
second that one.
I'm your rock, Dave.
I do have a group of people I look to that if I'm not sure, I'll talk to like the 3 people that are on the panel here with me. I trust their opinion. Yeah.
So I'm going to throw a curve out to Andrew and Val, especially. You have the structure, you have these set guidelines. That can all go out the window depending on where you are emotionally and what your mood is.
I disagree.
You don't think mood impacts what you're going to taste?
No.
Okay, why not?
Because that's emotion. And
my
like
emotions
I said, I'm slightly
dictate what I
autistic,
like.
so I don't give in to emotion. right?
I'm going to oppose that, Val, because if I'm in a situation where I'm with someone I love and I love the company, it could be a very drab dram. It could be wine, it could be beer, it could be whiskey. And I'm going to elevate that spirit because of the company I keep. And maybe I'm not trying to evaluate it, but the memory that it invokes when I go back to that moment and look at that spirit on the shelf or the beer or the wine, I'm probably going to go back to it. So I think emotions do have an effect on my buying, maybe not with someone who's trying to be objective, but I don't know if I'm always trying to be objective when I'm drinking.
And I'll give you that, Dolph, okay? There's a love-hate relationship in a lot of wines, whiskeys, spirits, whatever, right? Like, for instance, I'm sure all of you love Jim McEwen from Berclotti. And I had a very bad experience with that individual.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yep. And so as a result, it doesn't, in a blind tasting, it wouldn't affect my personal negative feelings towards Jim McEwen. And it's not all his fault. He was trapped at a tasting. And unfortunately, I was the target, but he didn't know that. In a blind tasting, I can certainly judge a wine, whiskey, or a cigar on its merits. But as soon as you bring in awareness, that changes everything. Okay.
So there's intent. So once we have the intent factor figured out, then maybe we can do that. And Andrew, I'm going to go to you. You're a tasting judge. You have it. So you have your tasters sent to you, and you might have 30 that you have to go through over a certain period of time for a tasting. And this is blind. You don't know what they are. You'll have A, B, C, or A1, B1, however they figure this out. How objective are you, let's say, based on your mood? Can your mood alter how you would taste these that you don't know what they are, who they come from? As blind as they can be, can your mood alter your taste?
Well, I will start by disagreeing with Val, and then I will end up by agreeing with Val.
I'll take this opportunity to disagree with Val, and then I'll answer your question. Thank you.
But obviously, when you're a professional taster, you learn to be as objective as possible. I'll come back to that point. And you can acquire an objectivity, and you will try and taste consistently, regardless of your mood and the weather and the atmospheric pressure and all the other things that play a role. But most people are not those professional tasters. Most people are just enjoying drinks. And under those circumstances, I think mood counts for an awful lot. Remember that all alcoholic beverages are emotional products. They're there to affect you emotionally. Alcohol affects you emotionally. So I think emotions are incredibly important. And also mood and atmospheric pressure and time of day and level of appetite and the aromas that are surrounding you at any one time, whether it's cold outside, whether it's hot outside, all of these things are extraordinarily important to most drinkers under most circumstances. Now, then we come to the sort of professional context where you can set those things aside. And in general, you can achieve a fairly high level of objectivity. Let's say with every year I'm the vice chair of or co-chair of Decanter World Wine Awards. So we taste 16 to 18,000 wines every year. I don't taste personally all of those, of course, but most days for a couple of weeks I'll be tasting 80 to 100 wines, let's say. Okay. And you can sort those out into disappointing wines, decent wines, good wines, and then excellent wines. But the problem, you can be objective about all of that. That's not too difficult. But when you then come to talk about the excellent wines with your peers, to decide which will be not just gold, but which will be platinum, or which will be trophy level, best in show, if you like. That's when you can't be objective anymore, when subjectivity really comes into it. And, I will have one opinion, my other co-chairs will have other opinions. none of us will be right, none of us will be wrong. At that point, when you're talking about the finest levels of distinction within any one of those broad quality groupings, then subjectivity does come back into it, and you have to accept that. In the final analysis, aesthetic judgments are subjective. You can get towards the aesthetic judgment by objective means when you're trained, but in the final analysis, all aesthetic judgments are subjective. And that's very, very important to say. That's why I loathe and detest giving things points. I have to do it, of course, because it's demanded of me as part of my job. But the whole idea of giving a whiskey or a wine, 99 points or 97 points or 95 points, and then arguing about it as if these things are permanent and fixed and immutable, to me is philosophically completely unjustifiable. It's absolute nonsense, and I haven't got any time for it at all.
I agree with you, Andrew, 100% on what you just said.
Okay, good.
The difficulty that I have, since you challenged me, I'm gonna
you're allowed to have the
back at you.
Valid.
Taste is not subjective. Taste is taste. Orange tastes like orange. Taste.
No, but everybody is tasting
Test is
oranges differently.
Is preference. What do you prefer? And that's where it gets into emotion. But taste is taste, and you got to be able to be slightly autistic to stay neutral.
Yeah, but remember that if you analyze people's tasting abilities, nobody tastes the same as anybody else. Everybody tastes differently. So, yes, taste is taste, but nobody is identical to any other taste. No taster is ever identical to another taster.
If you want to go down that rabbit hole, what does chicken taste like?
Because yes, I agree with you actually, but let's stop it, because this goes to a further philosophical. Well, I'm going back to philosophy, my second year university, and my professor was, "What do you see?" And it was a little red dot. And how do you know that this is exactly what the person beside you sees? Well, you were taught that that's the red dot. Well, do you see exactly what that person sees, or have you just related it because your parents said that's the red dot? And that goes with language, how you pronounce things and how you say things. Is this right and that's wrong? So I think at this point, we're going to be done with the conversation, because I want to continue with a little bit. But Val, I do agree, when you make the decision to be objective, we're more likely to be objective. I, on the other hand, have a hard time being objective because I am fairly well ruled by my emotions, as people who know me know. So next, I'm going back to a question we had before. So we talked about the clan wars and how that's inextricably linked to whiskey and Scotch for us. But I'm going to, and Ken talked about this before. We're going to say this in the After Dram, because I did give him the questions before. Why do we always care what the stills look like? So I'm going from one to the physical. We're looking at the stills. We always want to see the stills in the distilleries. And why? What makes us drawn towards these shiny things? And it's got to be more than it's shiny, please. Anyway. And Nick, as you're doing that, can you please put up the picture of the dual still tube? Because I still have that question for people to answer. Has anyone seen that still that's got the two line irons going out? And why do we always like to see stills? So anybody, as I drink my last little bit of Timorous.
Well,
okay, you know what? I want to add to this right now. I'm Ukrainian Orthodox, and if you look at our churches, we really like copper on the top of our churches, right? And so, I'm going to have a bias right off the bat to copper, and there's nothing you can do or say that's going to change my affinity to copper, because it's religious based. And I'm not a practicing Ukrainian Orthodox, but I'm a respectful Ukrainian Orthodox. Okay. And thanks to Andrew's book, I learned more about copper than I ever knew from the orthodoxy of copper. I didn't know that copper was a hairy metal. I'm so glad you taught me that. Yes. Right? And the other thing I know about copper is, unfortunately, it's also a metal that less than desirable people, and I'm not saying they're less than desirable people as a people, but they're thieves and
I
scoundrels.
gotta see where you're going with this, Val.
They want to steal copper to sell it to buy cocaine. Like,
Okay.
I just think that's wrong.
Okay, so let's take this back to our base elements. Coming out of the caveman, going in pre-industrial, what are the 3 elements we are looking at? Copper, silver, gold, all malleable metals. And I think somewhere in our genetics, because we are now able to work with base metals, this is why we're so drawn to those 3.
Okay.
Prove me
Can
wrong.
I just offer my perspective very briefly? I think copper is because of its practical qualities. It just works well for the task that it's been selected for. The actual shape of the stills, they've always struck me as being a womb-like shape. It is the womb in which the whiskey takes its form.
I never thought of that.
Yeah, so I think it's very hard to sort of to get away from that image that this is the womb in which the spirit comes into being, because before it's just beer in effect, and then afterwards it's this thing you have to age, but it's a newborn afterwards. You have to raise the newborn in the wood, but the actual birthing, the coming into being happens inside this womb-like still. That's why I think we're so fascinated by stills.
And my wife agrees with you, because she was saying it's the water of life and it's the creator of the water of life. And you want to see what this came from, what it originates as. And before Dave, because Dave's next, I do have a distillery that we had, and I think it was it was in Canada and the Maritimes, where I asked them this question for the first time, and they had Newfoundland, and most beautiful response from these guys. So I'm not going to say what it is. I want people to go back and watch the thing from the Newfoundland distillery, but it's a beautiful answer that these 2 gentlemen actually gave to this. I really like it, and that's where I'm staying, and I'm not going to say it. But Dave, you go ahead, buddy.
Well, I love industrial tours because I'm kind of the geeky guy. But when I walk into a brewery or a distillery, I don't want to see the malt. All I want to see is the brew house. And then with whiskey, I want to go and see the barrels. So where does it start and where's it ending up at? Like the packaging lines of no interest to me. If the guys, we bring the water in from the wells outside. That's not really interest. I want to see, where do you make it and where is it finished at?
With beer, I always like to taste the grain. That's all I'll add to yours, because I like to have a handful of the grain that they do and just chew on that just to see what it tastes like.
As a home brewer, I've sampled all the grains, so I've already gone past that.
Yeah,
I go back to.
It's nice to know if it's fresh and also. Kent and Nick, do you 2 have a comment in relation to this? And Val? Oh no, Val already talked about the gold-looking church. Okay.
I think I've already put my 2 cents in, and I'm going to bite my tongue from here on.
All right, Nick never bites her tongue. Go ahead.
For me, there's a visual appeal and there's a color. So seeing the copper, there's tones of color. Seeing the copper in shadow versus seeing the copper in light. For me, there's a different emotional response. It's beautiful in the shape. There's symmetry in the shape as you see this still. But there's something appealing in how the color flows from an orange to a pink. It can sometimes have a brown underhue to a purple underhue, and I enjoy that. And for me, color is important.
I love the symmetry thing as a math teacher. And Val, we're going to go to you because you're being so respectful with your hand up, and I'm a teacher and I'm just drawn to it. I'm sorry, Val. We'll go to Andrew for the last second, but we'll do you and then Andrew, and then we're signing off. Go ahead, Val.
I get all this, but I'm reading Pappyland right now, and there is one phrase in Pappyland that brings it all together for me, and that says, "Can it make the trip?" And by that they mean, can it make the trip from beginning to end?
Test of time.
All right.
Test of time.
Andrew, we'll have you sign off before I sign off. Last words to you, kind sir.
Okay, well, you know, I don't really have anything else to add to that, except that, you know, the distillation really is the core of the creation of whiskey for me. The beer, the malt is the raw material. All the aging process is the finishing, the education, but the actual coming into being is always the distillation. So to me, that is the core of the experience. I mean, we should also say that stills are huge things. They're great, big, monstrous things in front of you. And they're also warm too. They're not cold, they're warm. This is why I always felt I'd much rather be a distiller or a brewer than a winemaker, even though I spent most of my life writing about wine, because winemakers are getting cold the whole time because you're trying to keep everything cool. Whereas brewing and distilling are warm activities, essentially. So that's also a significant factor too. Just to say that we've had a great discussion. It's been terrific to be with you. I'm looking forward to next time. We've got other topics to get onto. That's the wonderful thing about Islay. It's such a rich place. There's so much to discover. And so I'm looking forward to discovering more with you next week.
Yeah. 3 questions out of 60.
We're all right. We're getting through them. Eventually, we'll do them all. Well, that's all the time we have, ladies and gentlemen. Again, it's been a fantastic afternoon. I've got to thank our listeners, and thanks to the panel, Dave, Kent, Nick, and Val. Val, for the first time being here, you've integrated very well into the group. Thank you very much. You're very gutsy. You get to say what's on your mind, and the After Dram's fantastic for that. A little swear here and there, all good. But a special thank you to Andrew. Again, you've been peppered with questions, and you've come out admirably. It's great. So that's it. I hope we haven't. We said this last week. We hope we didn't scare you away, and I think you're becoming a little bit more endeared to us the more time you spend with us. So I think that's a good thing. So here's the good company. Here's the good whiskey. Here's the good books. Here's the good conversation. And here's to see you all next week, Saturday, April 17th, 2021, at our new time, noon, Mountain Daylight Time, and the Whiskey Book Club's 10th book review. We're going to see Andrew at 8 o'clock his time. And I have to thank the viewers, the 100 of you that are going to watch this in the next week. Thank you very much for being here. And always seeing you. Sláinte, everybody. Have a fantastic night.